Listen, black folks, we've got to do better. We've got to do better. We keep playing right into the hands of our enemies. We've got to learn from history. We've got to do better with that knowledge. What I'm talking about is the racist legacy of beefing in the black community. We're playing right into their hands. I want to explain that to you. Stay with me. Hello, everybody. I am attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Each and every week, we bring you at least one legal analysis of some story trending regarding politics, policies, personalities, or pop culture to empower you with the information you need to defy an unjust legal system and to nullify systemic racism. If that interests you, and I really hope it does, go ahead and share, subscribe, comment, and click the bell so you'll get notified when we upload one of these videos. So thank you for staying with me again. I am attorney Augustus Corbett, and I got a little something on my mind today. I want to share some things, as you all have been seeing. We all have been seeing beefing, a lot of beefing between black people all over the television, all over YouTube, all over TikTok, all over Instagram, and everywhere else. Black folk beefing. We got to stop this. We just got to do better. We just got to do better. But somebody used to say, my mother, I think it was, we'll do better when we know better. We'll do better when we know better. So that's where I come in. I want you to know some things about beefing and the racist legacy behind beefing among black people. So let's get into it. Now, what I want to do first and foremost, as always, is I want to share with you my book entitled Education in Justice. If you have a young man, especially a young black man in public schools, you need to have this book in your arsenal. That's the way I like to look at it. In your arsenal. Something that you can grab and put in your purse, women, or in your briefcase, guys, to take with you when you have that all-important meeting with your son's teacher or principal or guidance counselor, so that you can know the issues and be able to advocate properly for him. All right? That's what this book does. It talks about all the ways that public schools fail our kids. And when I say fail, I'm not just talking about, of course, just failing grades, but I'm talking about failing across the board. But then it also gives you solutions. It gives you the law. It gives you tips and pointers on how you can be a strong advocate for your son. The name of the book is Education in Justice: How Public Schools Fail African American Males. So go out and get you a copy of this book. All right, so we're going to get into this today, the racist legacy of beefing in the black community. Let me say thank you for all the support that you're showing our channel. We greatly appreciate it. We got some new announcements coming. Number one, we have a Patreon account that we just created. I will give you additional information about our Patreon account in a further video. Also, we have created a website, or we're actually going to use a website that we already have, which is a website that is geared toward addressing some of the systemic racist issues in the African American community. It is called the Lazarus Law and Justice Project. We created this organization and this website some years ago. I will give you a full rundown of the Lazarus Law and Justice Project, again, in a future video. But yes, the Patreon account is almost up. I really invite you to go to the Patreon account because we're going to share some video on Patreon that we will not share with everybody, with the public. All right, there's some things that we need to say, some sensitive things that we need to say to our community and not broadcast it all over the world. There are some strategic things that I want to share with you, especially about this upcoming election. All right, so Patreon. Okay, so let's get into this. The racist legacy of beefing in the Black community. Let's go to another screen. As you all know, I tend to take my time and methodically explain my position. I guess that's because I'm both a lawyer and a minister, and that's what I do in both professions, okay? So this video is about the causes, consequences, and cures of Black beefing. The causes, the consequences, and cures of Black beefing. So let me give you some examples of Black beefs that have gone on over the years. And it just didn't start. It didn't just start here in the last week or last year or last month or so forth. Beefing all the way back to the tribes in Africa, just beefing to the point of killing one another, to the point of being burdened with beef on the African continent, that it opens the door for European, Asian, Russian, American companies to come in, and governments, and just plunder all the natural resources that are in the continent, all because the Blacks are too busy, the Africans are too busy beefing with one another, and their attention is distracted, and meanwhile, folks are robbing them blind, okay? So tribalism in Africa, House Negro versus Field Negro, Malcolm X talked about the beef between those two groups. W.B. Du Bois versus Booker T. Washington, we're all familiar with that beef. W.B. Du Bois versus Marcus Garvey, we're all familiar with that beef. Tyler Perry, come into recent history, Tyler Perry versus Spike Lee. The Bloods versus the Crips, Michael Eric Dyson versus Cornel West, South Side versus West Side, Tupac versus Biggie, Will Smith versus Chris Rock, Monique versus Tyler, D.L. Hughley, Oprah, her son, Cat Williams versus Kevin Hart, Ricky Smiley, etc., and many more. Now, we all know that some of these beefs are manufactured just to get some attention, because what's the old saying? Any publicity is good publicity. So whether it's a part of a beef or not, for those who are in the entertainment field especially, yes, they love, they crave, they seriously desire publicity, even if it's negative publicity, all right? So some of this publicity is manufactured, but a lot of it is not. So what is beefing? I developed a definition that I think cover 5 areas that we need to look at in this video. So beefing, arising from discontentment. Beefing begins with a disrespectful jab, a statement that disturbs the targeted person while potentially dividing the community and causing death in the community. All right, let me say it again. Let me repeat it. Beefing arises from discontentment with a disrespectful jab that disturbs the targeted person, the target, while potentially dividing and causing death in the community. Once again, arising from discontentment, beefing begins with a disrespectful jab, some words, a statement or something that disturbs the target while potentially dividing and causing death in the community. Now we need to read it one more time. Just one more time. Just one more time. Arising from discontentment, beefing begins with a disrespectful jab that disturbs the target while potentially dividing and causing death in the community. That is beefing. And notice my definition has 5 words that begin with the letter D. We're going to look at them in turn. Now, the racist root of beefing. I'm going to read a little bit from a book written by Professor Petley, he is a professor of history at the University of Southampton in the UK. His latest book, this is the one that I'm quoting from, is White Fury, a Jamaican Slaveholder and the Age of Revolution. So Professor Petley says, physical abuse alone could not keep the lucrative plantations of the British Caribbean productive. It is impossible to get large groups of people to perform sustained labor effectively and consistently for years on end simply through doling out pain and raw terror. Even the most brutal of slaveholders were therefore compelled to develop a sophisticated system of management that exploited the most human aspirations and fears of the people they dominated. So just brute force, as violent as the plantation was, violence alone was not enough to control large groups of African people who were spirited people who wanted nothing else but to be back in Africa, free, not being enslaved. Brute force was not enough to control those people. Those people, our ancestors, had to be controlled psychologically, mentally, emotionally, not just physically. All right, the professor goes on to say, creating divisions between slaves was essential to this. Creating divisions. That's how you conquer people. That's how you control a group of people. You create divisions. Enslaved people outnumbered free whites in the British Caribbean. In Jamaica, the ratio was higher than 10 to 1. And on some big plantations, it was about 100 to 1. Managers therefore needed to divide slaves in order to rule over them. The slave trade from Africa provided them with one opportunity. Now just think about it. The population in the British Caribbean during slavery was at least 10 to 1 blacks. 10 to 1. And so on some plantations, it was 100 to 1. They could have easily overcome the whites, the Brits, and won their freedom. But why did they remain in that enslaved situation when they outnumbered the whites? Why? Because of psychological control. And one of the things they did to bring about that psychological control was to bring about division. All right, you see where I'm headed? As a manager of several large Jamaican sugar estates remarked in 1804, it was a general policy to have the Negroes on an estate a mixture of nations so as to balance one set against another, to be sure of having 2/3 join the whites in the event of an uprising. The theory behind this was that enslaved people from one African nation would refuse to join rebellions plotted by those from others or by Creole, locally born slaves, choosing instead to serve their white masters in the hope of rewards for loyal service. So they would try to pit one nation of Africans against another nation of Africans. And in so doing, now their power, their unity was divided. And also their loyalty was divided. Their loyalty was not between each other. Their loyalty was in competition for the master's goodwill. Do you see what I'm saying? These are the things they used. And this is not, by the way, let me say this. This is not the Willie Lynch letter. To my knowledge, the Willie Lynch letter is not authentic. This is a professor at a university in Britain who has studied slave plantations back in the British Caribbean islands. And just because it's not America doesn't mean that we cannot learn the techniques, because those techniques were widely used across the world. All right. So this is real information coming from a professor who, again, has researched and documented life on the plantation. All right, let's go back. Privileging some enslaved people above others was another effective means of sowing discord. Slaveholders encouraged complex social hierarchies on the plantations that amounted to something like a system of class. At the top of plantation slave communities in the sugar colonies of the Caribbean were skilled men, trained up at the behest of white managers to become sugar boilers, blacksmiths, carpenters, coopers, masons, drivers. Those were the slave drivers. Such men were, in general, materially better off than field slaves, most of whom were women, and they tended to live longer. So they would privilege some of the enslaved Africans above others, would give them better positions, out in the fields or better positions in the home or in the house, in the plantation house, the big house, the plantation owner's house. And in so doing, what would that breed? Discord, discontentment, division. So if we go back to my definition of what beefing is, it always starts with discontentment. It always starts with discontentment. Someone who's discontent in their own life for whatever reason typically starts the beef. If it's not one of those manufactured beefs, like I said earlier. All right. The most important members of this enslaved elite were the drivers. Again, those were the ones who made the other enslaved Africans work hard. They weren't always Africans themselves. Oftentimes they were white. But in order for an African to get that coveted position, he had to be really loyal to the enslaver. So he was the most important member of this enslaved elite, responsible for enforcing discipline and work routines among the other enslaved workers. These men were essential to effective plantation management, a conduit for orders and sometimes for negotiations between white overseers and the massed ranks of field workers. They were also among the strongest survivors of the system. So you see how they are sowing discontent and discord amongst the enslaved? This is the root of beefing that we see in America. Some of it, again, started long before we got here, but a whole lot of it, the American style beef, is the result of remnants of the plantation, which is why I said in the beginning, we got to do better. We got to do better. We got to stop getting played like this. The privileges conferred on the enslaved elite came in several forms: better food, better clothing, more clothing, better and bigger housing, even the prospect in some rare cases that a master might use his last will and testament to free them, the ultimate prize. It could even be demonstrated in a name. For instance, the head driver on one Jamaican sugar estate is listed in the records of 1813 through 1814 by the name of Emmanuel, but also by another name, James Reed. The reason for this was that Emmanuel had been baptized by an Anglican curate with the approval of the plantation owner. He was among a minority of enslaved people on the estate with a Christian name and a surname, people whose baptism helped to distinguish them from the multitude. So even having the master's name carried with it certain privileges that brought about division, right? Because you can just see some of the enslaved folks in the field feeling a certain way because this person is getting, this other enslaved African is getting these privileges, getting more food, getting better food, getting bigger houses, getting more perks. What was that doing? Driving discontentment, bringing about discord, right? All right, so let's go here. Let's keep looking at this. Discontentment, just like we said. Discontentment, the condition of being dissatisfied with one's life or situation. Disrespect. Disrespect. Remember the definition. Discontentment, arising from discontentment. Beefing starts with a disrespectful jab. And we know in the black community, Respect is very important. I believe it was Birdman who showed up at the Breakfast Club and said, famously or infamously, put some respect on my name. Now, we're going to look at this author here, Degu, who explains to us why respect is so important in the African American community. By the way, I highly recommend this book if it's not a part of your library. Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. She explains how having gone through slavery has caused trauma in the African American community that has been passed down from generations. Very good book, Dr. Joy Degu. All right, so Dr. Degu says, imagine how many times something like this has happened to you. A person is disrespected once too often at work, so they blow up at their boss and lose their job. A person is disrespected at the hospital, so they stop going to that facility. When they were younger, they were disrespected over and over again by their teachers, so they angrily decided education has no value. As Black Americans, a number of issues and questions with regard to disrespect are in play. How likely are we to perceive someone's behavior or a situation as disrespectful? Why do we perceive it as such, and how do we respond once we believe ourselves to be disrespected? Issues of respect and disrespect are central to the African American experience. A history as a people of hundreds of years of slavery, Jim Crow, the Klan, lynching, police brutality, and the like would certainly have some influence on such perceptions. Add to this our personal experience of the injustice that runs throughout American society, and it is no surprise that we are hypersensitive about matters of respect. Let's consider this in terms of numbers. How many times in your life have you felt disrespected? How many times have you seen other African Americans disrespected? How many times have you heard about other African Americans being disrespected? I would guess that on average, African Americans' experience of disrespect would far exceed those of the average white person. African Americans frequently have a visceral response to disrespect whenever it rears its ugly head, even during times when the person being disrespected is not Black. It is frequently the African American observer who will become vocal in support of the individual being maligned. More significant than the number of times a person feels disrespected is the way they internalize the event. In other words, the emotional impact that the perceived disrespect had on them. In my experience, African Americans tend to be more deeply affected by disrespect, causing them undue stress and difficulties. How true that is. How many people have I seen in my law practice or my ministry who have gotten themselves in a world of trouble because of disrespect? Because it just seems to hit us deeper for all the reasons that Dr. Degu says. We are a people who have been constantly disrespected for over 400 years. We deal with the blatant disrespect from whites. Then we deal with what's called microaggressions, where they are not necessarily big, outright, blatant, disrespectful moments, but they're the small little things. You still know it's disrespect. You still know this person is disrespecting you, but it's not that big, not that blatant. And then, of course, we deal with disrespect amongst ourselves because we tend to disrespect each other a lot. If we're harboring self-hatred for ourselves, then quite naturally, and Dr. Degu is going to talk about that, it's going to be easier for us to disrespect another Black person. And that disrespect just cuts deep for us. So let's go back. She says, which brings us to the question of our response. In general, the more post-traumatic slave syndrome impacts us, the more likely we are to respond in a way that will ultimately not be in our best interests. In other words, if we are seriously reeling from PTSS or post-traumatic slave syndrome, then disrespect is going to impact us even greater. That's what she's saying. Often these responses entail an emotional reaction to being disrespected. Though we may feel that our reaction is justified and appropriate at the time, the negative consequences of our reaction can outweigh the momentary sense of justice. In the face of disrespect, whether real or perceived, African Americans must find a more workable way of dealing with it. We have little control over how others will behave. However, we have a choice as to how we respond and a responsibility to exercise that choice in a way that is useful. Now, before we read any more, let me just say, I remember when Shannon Sharpe and Mike Epps were exchanging jabs. Mike is funny and Shannon is very animated, right? So Shannon is talking about, I'm going to see you. I'm going to see you. I'm going to see you. I'm going to see you at the All-Star game. And Mike Epps responded with some things, jabbing back at Shannon. And the part that really disturbed me was when he said, now, I don't fight. Instead, I pat, 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 pat. And we know what he was talking about. He was talking about shooting. Come on, Mike. Come on, guys. We got to do better than that. All these shootings in our community, we're going to be loose with threats of shooting another man over some disrespect, over some words. You know why I'm sensitive to this? Because again, I cannot tell you how many young black men have walked into our office facing felony charges, having just harmed someone or killed someone because of disrespect. Because of disrespect. And look, when this happens, it doesn't just impact the person who's dead. I have more to say about that in just a moment. I won't get ahead of myself. Dr. Degu says the ways in which we choose to respond influence the range of responses that our children come to believe are available to them. If we continue to be emotionally vulnerable to these acts of disrespect, we will relegate our children to a life of victimization. At the very least, we need to learn how to overcome our initial feelings and reactions and respond in a way that serves us. My question is, how fragile is a person to consider an insult an assault? Why do we so often hear his manhood was at stake? He had to do something. Perhaps when we do not have sufficient self-esteem, the ideal of manhood is all we have left. Some words are not an assault unless they're threatening words. In Texas, yes, words can be an assault. Words can be an assault where they are threatening to do something. But other than that, words are words. They're just words. What's the old saying? Sticks and stones and fists and knives and bullets may break my bones, but words can't hurt me physically. Therefore, they are not assaults unless they threaten to do some physical harm. And as Dr. Degu says, why do we associate what someone says with our manhood? Now, it appears that Mike Epps was essentially saying that Shannon is a gay man. So he was literally going at Shannon's sexual identity, sexual preference. And Shannon took sharp objection to that. So with us men, there is this issue of manhood, and you do not assail our manhood. Because as she said, Dr. Degu says, oftentimes, that's all we got. That's all we got. If you take that from us, we don't have anything else. That's the way a lot of African American men process disrespect, subconsciously. Because, again, everything else oftentimes has been taken away. Society is beating them down. They're dealing with microaggressions daily. Oftentimes blatant disrespect and racism on the job, in the neighborhood, just being at the bank, just going to the grocery store. We get it. And so that disrespect impacts us more. And so we're all over the place, to the point of walking up on the stage, doing the Oscars, and slapping the taste out of somebody's mouth. Wow. Because of words that were targeted toward one's wife, Will Smith's wife. And that's how Will Smith dealt with it. All right, let's go back. We got to do better. We must do better. Perhaps when for centuries we have not been allowed to be men, our concept of manhood has yet to mature. Perhaps our sense of who and what we are leads us to perceive any minor slight as an assault on our very core. And when our core is in danger, we respond with anger, rage, and sometimes violence. And this response often results in behaviors that undermine much of what we're working to accomplish. I cannot tell you, I really cannot tell you how many people come through the criminal justice system, black men in particular, because of disrespect or perceived disrespect. And I'm a black man too. Let me just own up to that. I'm a brother as well. And I don't like being disrespected. And I will address being disrespected. But in my 62 years, I'll be 62 this coming Friday. In my 62 years, I have been able to manage my response to being disrespected, to not allow it to cause me to really ruin my life. Now, here's some pressure when you're dealing with disrespect. Because disrespect is so important in our community, oftentimes it is your friends who are standing around egging you on, both saying things like, are you going to let him get away with that? Or, man, you a punk if you let him get away with that, disrespecting you like that. And all the guy did was say some things. Certainly not worth someone throwing their life away for, right? Certainly not worth that. But that disrespect just cuts too deep. There's a reputation that must be maintained at all costs. I remember one time in college, a guy, we were all sitting around, a bunch of us guys, and a dude threw some chicken bones at me, hit me with some chicken bones. We all buddies, and we all just sitting around. And he started throwing chicken bones at me. We're good friends today. But that was somewhat of a humiliating situation because, again, I'm sitting here with a bunch of dudes who believe in throwing them hands if you get disrespectful. But I knew I was in a situation where if I threw my hands, it would be real bad for me. It would be real bad for me. I was in college at that time, and I had already gotten myself in some trouble. So one more little bit of trouble for me, it would have been over for me. So I had to take those chicken bones and the humiliation and losing somewhat of some reputation in front of these guys because I didn't just go off on this guy. I've had to do that many times. Many times, I cannot tell you how many times I have had to overlook disrespect, just trying to fulfill the vision I had for my life. Now, there is a Bible verse that I want to share with you. It says, where there is no vision, the people perish. When a man doesn't have any vision, doesn't know where he's going, doesn't know what he want to do with his life, or he has a bad vision for his life, then that man will not restrain himself. But a man who has a vision, who's trying to get somewhere, who's trying to do something with his life, will not allow minor distractions and moments of disrespect to cause him to derail his life. So vision is real important. Okay. Divisiveness. Beefs are very divisive because when the beefs occur, people are going to take sides. There's going to be division. And beef in and of itself is divisive for another reason. Watch this. Again, back to Dr. Degu's book here. Crabs in the barrel syndrome. Have you ever heard of that? Yes, we in the Black community know all about crabs in the barrel. Here's what Dr. Degu says. She says, how often has the most unbearable antagonist at the job, at school, or the committee, in the church or mosque been another Black person? No doubt fools and idiots come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, and African Americans certainly have no shortage of them. However, there seems to be an uncanny tendency among many Blacks to orchestrate and plot the demise of other Blacks, sometimes even friends and relatives. It is as though the achievements of family and friends and colleagues and acquaintances are seen as a threat or an affront. This is a very good book, you all. If I believe that Black people are inferior and someone who's Black is being promoted over me, then I am the lower than the lowest. If, on the other hand, someone white is promoted over me, again, I have learned to accept the white person being advanced as a normal process, be it fair or unfair. Historically, during slavery, the promotion of one Black person over another usually meant that they would soon use their newly acquired position to further tyrannize those Blacks occupying lesser positions. Now, that's what the professor told us just a moment ago. It was one of the techniques that the enslaver used against us to bring about division. And again, we all know about that crab in the barrel syndrome. We all know about that. All right, now, when we talk about division and how destructive it is in our community, it's destructive because we need unity. Now, that doesn't mean we need uniformity. We can have unity without having uniformity. So you see the diagram here, different slices of this Black pie. Every slice represents a different type of Black or different group of Blacks. They're all Black, but they're different. They're all Black, but they're different. Let me say it again. They're all Black, but they're different. But they are part of the same pie. They're still bound because they are part of the same pie. So there can be unity here, although there's not necessarily uniformity. Because, yes, Black Americans are not a monolith. We've heard the saying, we know it's true, we don't all think the same. But we still need unity. There are some things that still bind us together. We still need some unity. Let me show you how we can achieve it. Now, take this same diagram. And there are some fundamental things that we should be able to agree about. We must be able to agree that white supremacy and systemic racism exist, and we must dismantle them. White supremacy and systemic racism exist. They are the enemy. Those ideologies, those practices, they are our enemy. We should be able to agree on that and should be working together to dismantle both of them. Now, yes, of course, you got some black conservatives who deny, like Tim Scott, that there is any systemic racism in America, that there is any white supremacy. Listen, we're not talking about extreme people like that. There are some black conservatives who will agree that there is white supremacy and systemic racism, and that it should be, must be dismantled. They're not Democrats, they're not liberals, they're not progressives, they're conservatives, but they are able to acknowledge what is obviously in existence. All right? So we still can have unity without having uniformity, so long as we can agree on that little black circle in the middle. That circle should consist of a number of core beliefs about our shared plight and history as black people. That circle in the middle are the things that we should be able to agree on, have unity concerning, without being uniform. Are you getting it? Because there are certain things that bind us just because we are melanated people. Now, yes, again, we know you got those blacks out there who hate being black. They don't see themselves as black. They're trying to be white so much. I did a video on that. Go watch that video. But the majority of us should be able to, again, have unity on some core issues without us having uniformity or having to agree on everything. Just some center core values that we should be able to share. Now that brings me to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. His book, Where Do We Go From Here? I strongly encourage you to buy this book. Dr. King talks about a new self-image. He says, only by being reconciled to ourselves will we be able to build upon the resources we already have at our disposal. Too many Negroes, and that was just the term they used back in the day, too many Negroes are jealous of other Negroes' successes and progress. Too many Negro organizations are warring against each other with a claim to absolute truth. The pharaohs had a favorite and effective strategy to keep their slaves in bondage, keep them fighting amongst themselves. The divide and conquer technique has been a potent weapon in the arsenal of oppression. But when slaves unite, the Red Seas of history open and the Egypts of slavery crumble. The man just had a way with words. This plea for unity is not a call for uniformity. There it is. There must always be healthy debate. There will be inevitable differences of opinion. The dilemma that the Negro confronts is so complex and monumental that its solution will of necessity involve a diversified approach. But Negroes can differ and still unite around common goals. That's why I gave you that illustration. We can differ. We can, let me bring it back up. We can differ. We don't have to be uniform in our opinions and beliefs, but the core, the center of us as a people, certain values and certain facts of history, current facts, present, future facts, we should be able to agree on without having to become each other, is the point. So Dr. King says, but Negroes can differ and still unite around common goals. There are already structured forces in the Negro community that can serve as the basis for building a powerful united front. The Negro Church, the Negro Press, the Negro fraternities and sororities, and Negro professional associations. We must admit that these forces have never given their full resources to the cause of Negro liberation. There are still too many Negro churches that are so absorbed in a future good over yonder that they condition their members to adjust to the present evils over here. Powerful. Powerful. Too many Negro newspapers have veered away from their traditional role as a protest organs agitating for social change and have turned to the sensational and the conservative in place of the substantive and the militant. Instead of newspapers nowadays, social media, right? YouTube, IG, TikTok, Facebook, X, and so on. Too many Negro social and professional groups have denigrated into snobbishness and a preoccupation with frivolities and trivial activity. But the failures of the past must not be an excuse for the inaction of the present and the future. Could nobody say a thing like Dr. King? And he just said a thing. Get that book. Get his book. Let me bring it back up. Get his book, as well as Dr. Degu's book. Each and every show that I do, I try to introduce you to books because leaders are readers. And we're trying to raise up a class of leaders. So, back to our definition. So what you have, again, is a discontented person who is throwing out a disrespectful jab that has disturbed somebody. Now, when that disturbance occurs and a person's peace has been stolen and they feel disrespected, there you go. Now you got the beefing. Full out. Full stop. We beefing now. Now the beefing begins. Okay? Angry beefing. Two brothers going at it. Now here is my concern, and the reason why I'm doing this video is because oftentimes it results into not only divisiveness of our community, but death. I see it all the time, folks. Especially our young men feeling disrespected or trying to revenge a disrespect. And it ends up with death. Just this past week, as the Kansas City Chiefs were celebrating in a parade, several juveniles allegedly opened fire, killing someone. Now, I don't know if those juveniles are black or what, but whatever race, whatever color, whatever nationality they are, it all started because of a beef. Now, Shannon Sharp and Mike Epps, they made up. These two men got children. They got a great future, a good life. So they were able to work through their differences. But again, so many times that doesn't happen. And someone gets laid out. Someone is killed. Someone is injured. And when that happens, typically both people suffer, and their families and communities, all because of a beef. And so this is my last slide, and I saved it for last because it is heartbreaking that homicide is the leading cause of death for young black men from the age 1 through 44. Homicide, the leading cause of death. Not heart disease, not accidents, not suicides. Homicide. That says that there's a lot of pain, a lot of what Dr. Degu talks about, post-traumatic slave syndrome. A lot of hurt young men. And that pain, that trauma is triggered when they become the target of disrespect, or their set, or their group, their gang, their community, their neighborhood, their zip code. And then someone got to pay the price. And given their undeveloped brains, given their undeveloped emotions, oftentimes many of them are quick to pull out their heater and release fire. I know it's true because I'm an attorney and our caseload currently consists of many young black men who responded unwisely to disrespect. The CDC reports that the firearm homicide rate among black males 10 to 24 was 20.6 times as high as the rate among white males of the same age in 2019, pre-pandemic. And this ratio increased to 21.6 during the pandemic. 20.6 times higher than white males. Young black men between the age of 10 and 24, the homicide rate 20 times higher. And again, a lot of that can be traced to beefs. Now again, Shannon and Mike, they worked through it. They got past it without any violence, but they set a horrible example. There are young men who take that seriously and do just exactly what he made fun of. We gotta do better. We gotta do better. We gotta stop playing into the hands of the white man who triggered this trauma that we're dealing with as a community, who intentionally used divisive techniques to control and to minimize our manhood. And here we are, almost 200 years later, still reeling from the impact of slavery, which is why I can't stand it when I hear whites and black conservatives saying, that was 200 years ago. It doesn't matter that it was 200 years ago. When something becomes a part of one's thinking, subconsciously and unconsciously becomes a part of their culture, it is hard to break that, and it will go from generation to generation. Again, look at the Native American community. They've been reeling with things as long as we have. And no one says to them, just get over it. Because there's trauma there. We got to do better. We got to stop the beef. We got to nip it in the bud. Don't even take the bait. Deal with that disrespect in a different way. Like with Will Smith, wait till the show is over. Pull Chris to the side. Get Chris on the phone. Get your people to connect with his people. Not slap a man on almost live TV in front of hundreds of millions of people. That was a real low moment for the African American community. And I'm sure one of the lowest, if not the lowest moment for both Chris and Will. And again, lawyers like myself and morticians and ministers, we deal with the aftermath. We deal with the young men who pulled the trigger or the young man who didn't make it through in their families. We got to do better. All right, I'm attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Again, we bring you this type of material at least once a week. If this material is useful in your mind, please share it, comment, subscribe, and click the bell. Until the next time, you be good. Peace. Increase the peace.